Marvel and Disney break up after failing to come to an agreement for future Spider-Man appearances in the MCU, once again leaving Spider-Man far from home. My name is Tom, I don't want to go, and this is Tom's Take. Hey there guys, my name is Tom and welcome back to another video. So let's talk about this. A report just broke this morning. I have just woken up to this news. Marvel Studios and Disney and Sony have all failed to come to an agreement for future Spider-Man appearances in the MCU, which means that Spider-Man, our beloved Tom Holland, and his future movies will not be part of the MCU. Or will it? Hang on a second, I'll get to that. Apparently, Disney wanted a bigger piece of the pie after Spider-Man Far From Home grossed $1 billion. Reportedly, instead of getting 5% of the revenue, Disney wanted to up it to 50% of the revenue for future Spider-Man movies. And Sony didn't agree to that, therefore they pulled out of the deal with the MCU. Therefore, Spider-Man is no longer in the MCU. Again, or will he be? Now, everyone's losing their minds about this, and I'm not happy about this either. I love Spider-Man in the MCU. That's where he's been for the last 4 years. I've loved what Marvel have done with him for the most part. And everyone's upset because, oh no, Kevin Feige's lost full control of Spider-Man, and that's all those headlines have been saying, and I've just been telling people, back off a little bit because Kevin Feige never had full control over Spider-Man. Spider-Man has always belonged to Sony. They have always had control over this character. Kevin Feige has never been able to do anything with Spider-Man in the MCU that Sony didn't approve of. So don't go thinking that Kevin Feige had full control to start with. He was the creative lead, but he still had to answer to his bosses at Marvel, Disney, and Sony. Now, I'm going to talk about what that means for Spider-Man movies going forward in a second, but let me just say this. I don't blame Sony for this at all. I actually blame Disney for this. Now, hold your horses, but I know everybody doesn't like to blame Disney, but let me just say this. Spider-Man belongs to Sony. Full control, they have the rights, they can do with Spider-Man whatever they want to do. Marvel and Disney have no say in it whatsoever. This deal to have Spider-Man appear in the MCU expired with Far From Home. Disney knew it expired with Far From Home. Sony knew it expired with Far From Home. Disney knew that from his first appearance in Civil War to Spider-Man Far From Home, they knew that's when that deal expired, and they knew there was a very real possibility that Sony would yank him out of the MCU. Now, I didn't think they would yank Spider-Man out of the MCU because of how well he's been doing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's a win-win. Marvel has won by having Spider-Man in the MCU, and Sony has made a truckload of money from having Spider-Man in the MCU because they are the distributor. Therefore, they get most, if not all, of the box office results from the Spider-Man movies, even though they're being produced by Marvel Studios. And Marvel Studios, according to this report, got 5% of that revenue back from the box office. So I don't actually blame Sony for this. Sony had every right to pull Spider-Man out of the MCU. They want to use him and do their own thing with him. They can go right ahead. I have no problem with that. Disney probably shouldn't have asked for a bigger cut. They should have just left it alone because they were both benefiting from this. I can understand why you might go, hang on a second, that Spider-Man movie made $1 billion. Let's ask for a bigger piece of the pie. But neither studio wanted to budge on their side of things, and that's totally understandable. Things happen, relationships break up. I know it, you know it, we all know it. Sometimes things just don't work out the way we wanted. However, let's talk about what this means for Tom Holland and his Spider-Man and Spider-Man movies going forward. Here's my thoughts on the situation. I've read a couple of other things that have suggested, and I don't know this for a fact, this isn't official yet. None of this is official yet. I should just preface this by saying none of this is official yet, okay? These are just reports. For all we know, Disney and Sony could come to an agreement tomorrow and Spider-Man will remain in the MCU. Sony still wants to use Tom Holland as Spider-Man, and that would be great because he is my all-time favorite Spider-Man and Peter Parker. And I don't know all the details of the deal, but I'm assuming if Sony so wanted to use Tom Holland as Spider-Man for future Spider-Man movies, they would have every right to do so. Now, to me, if they're going to use Tom Holland in their future Spider-Man movies and those movies officially won't be part of the MCU, well, they kind of would be, wouldn't they? They would be in the MCU because Tom Holland is in the MCU. So even if future Spider-Man movies going forward with Tom Holland have no MCU characters in them or have no references to the larger MCU, they would still technically be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe because you have Tom Holland as Spider-Man. Now the question here is, does Marvel and Disney want Sony to continue with Tom Holland's Spider-Man? And I don't believe Marvel or Disney have a say in what Sony does with Tom Holland. But I can't imagine that Marvel and Disney would be happy to have Sony continue to make Spider-Man movies with Tom Holland, who is in the MCU. Essentially, then Sony making movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe without Marvel having a say at all. Because let's say they do a third Spider-Man movie with Tom Holland and continue where Spider-Man Far From Home left off. Well, that is in the MCU. That movie took place in the MCU. You had Nick Fury in there. You had Maria Hill. You had other surprise characters I'm not going to spoil for you in that film, who have been in previous MCU movies. So if they do a third Spider-Man movie, I'm sorry, whether Sony or Disney say it or not, that movie is in the MCU. Or does Sony take him back, wait a few years, and reboot Spider-Man, and we just have no more Spider-Man in the MCU? That's the way that is. Maybe that's the way to go. And honestly, I don't know what I prefer. I think I'd rather see Sony make a third Spider-Man movie, another home Spider-Man movie with Tom Holland, finish out that storyline, just finish that up, wrap it up, put a nice little bow on the Spider-Man Home trilogy, even though it would be de facto in the MCU. If they're allowed to do so, do that, put a nice little bow on it, end it, wait a few years, and then reboot with a different Spider-Man. And don't come at me with these comments about, well, Tom Holland has X amount of films left on his contract still. That has nothing to do with it. Those contracts with the actors only oblige the actors to appear in the movies if the studios want them to. They don't oblige the studios to have that actor in that amount of movies. So if Tom Holland has like a 9-picture deal and has so many films still left on his contract, that's only if Sony wants him to come back. That doesn't oblige Sony to use him for that amount of movies. So here's the thing. I think this is a bad move. I don't agree with this at all. I think this was a bad call on Disney's part to actually ask for more money. I can understand why they would, but I think, you know what? If it ain't broke, don't try and fix it. It's working perfectly. Just let it work perfectly. Because up until now, this has been a really good relationship from all reports between Sony and Disney. I can understand them asking for more money. I can. But at the same time, you have another successful franchise in the MCU with Tom Holland. You're benefiting from having Tom Holland in the MCU. Just let it be. But I'm also not going to blame Sony for this, because I can totally understand Sony going, no, fuck you, he's our character, we're taking him back as we have the right to do. This contract expired with Far From Home anyway, and it was up to Sony whether they wanted to re-up the deal or not. So I'm not gonna bash Sony for this at all. I completely understand where Sony is coming from here. I actually, if anything, put more of the fault with Disney for this one. But where do you guys sit on this argument? Let me know in the comments section down below. Let me know how you feel about this. Either way, I'd be very interested to know your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that subscribe button, ring that notifications bell so that you never miss out on my take on all things movies. My name is Tom. I have to go now. And this was Tom's Take. I will see you guys next time.